My name is Emily Carter. And I turned 23. On the night my father handed my graduate school savings to my stepbrother in front of 200 wedding guests. I was standing near the back of the Millbrook Country Club ballroom, still holding the small velvet box that held the pearl earrings my late mother had left me for this exact kind of milestone. The string quartet was playing something soft and expensive. My stepbrother Tyler was on stage giving his rehearsal dinner speech. Champagne glass raised. When my father walked up behind him with a white envelope and said into the microphone, "A little something to help my son start his new life right." Tyler opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $22,000. My dad smiled like he was handing over a trophy. Tyler's fiancée squealed. The room erupted in applause. And I stood there feeling the air leave my lungs, because I recognized the exact amount, $22,000. That was the balance in the graduate school account my mother had opened for me before she died of pancreatic cancer when I was 14. The account my father swore on her hospital bed he would protect. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the velvet box. I didn't even cry. I walked quietly out the side door, past the valet stand, past the rose hedges my stepmother Diana had insisted on for photographs, and sat down on the curb in my thrift store formal dress. Then I pulled out my phone and checked the account one more time, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Balance $0. Ling ling. Last transaction wire transfer. 3 days earlier. I didn't know yet that walking away from that curb would burn down everything my father and stepmother had spent 10 years building. I just knew I wasn't going back inside. Before I tell you how a single Substack article detonated my father's business and my stepbrother's wedding in the same week, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And one more thing. Have you ever watched someone hand your future to somebody else and smile about it like you weren't even in the room? I grew up in Millbrook, Oregon, a town small enough that my father's hardware supply company, Carter Industrial, had its logo on the Little League scoreboard, the fire department's annual calendar, and the plaque outside the public library. Everyone knew us. Everyone thought they knew us. My mother, Rebecca, had been a high school English teacher before she got sick. She was the quiet engine of our family, the one who remembered birthdays and signed permission slips and wrote me little notes in the margins of books she wanted me to read. When she was dying, she did 2 things that would matter more than I understood at 14. First, she set up an education trust in my name with the life insurance payout, $22,000, growing slowly in a high-yield account. Second, she made my father promise, with her sister Margaret in the room as a witness, that the money was mine and nobody else's. 11 months after her funeral, my father married Diana Vance, a divorced interior designer with a son, 2 years older than me. Tyler, the golden stepson. I called Aunt Margaret from the curb outside the country club. She picked up on the second ring the way she always did, like she kept her phone close, in case I ever needed her. She lived 2 towns over in a converted farmhouse full of filing cabinets and cat hair and old newspaper clippings from her 32 years as an investigative reporter for the Oregonian. She said. "What's wrong?" I told her in flat, short sentences. The check. The amount. The account. The zero balance. The applause. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Come here. Don't go back to that house tonight. Pack a bag if you can. But if you can't, just come." I took an Uber to my dad's house, let myself in through the side door, and climbed the stairs as quietly as I could. Everyone was still at the rehearsal dinner. I packed my laptop, my notebooks, The external hard drive with every piece of graduate school research I'd done for the last 2 years. A few changes of clothes. And the cedar box, under my bed, that held my mother's letters. Her wedding ring. And the bank paperwork she'd given me when I was 14. I took the stairs back down, and almost made it out, before I stopped in the doorway of my father's home office. His filing cabinet was unlocked. The way it always was. Because Diana had convinced him nobody in the family would ever snoop. I stood there for about 30 seconds weighing it. Then I walked in. Opened the drawer marked Household Financial. And took pictures of every single page I could see. Bank statements. Credit card statements. Something labeled Carter Industrial, vendor reconciliations. That I didn't understand yet but instinctively knew mattered. I took 216 photos in about 11 minutes. Then I closed the drawer. Walked out. And drove to Aunt Margaret's. She opened the door in a flannel robe holding a mug of tea that she handed to me without asking. "Sit," she said. "Eat something. Then show me what you found." That night, at her kitchen table, I watched a 64-year-old woman with reading glasses, on a beaded chain, turn into the investigative reporter my father had always quietly feared. She scrolled through my photos on a tablet, zooming in, asking me to forward specific ones to her email, muttering things like, "Oh, that's interesting and well, in a voice that got steadier and sharper as the hours passed. Around 2 in the morning, she took off her glasses, rubbed her eyes, and said, "Emily, I need you to understand something. And I need you to hear me out before you react. Your father didn't just take your college money. He's been running vendor invoices through Carter Industrial for years that don't match anything the IRS has seen. I can't prove it in one night. But the pattern is there. And your stepmother's interior design firm is one of the vendors." I stared at her. I mean, your mother's money isn't the only thing that's been quietly disappearing. There are people in that company, including your mother's old friend Linda, who does their accounts receivable, who have probably noticed things and not known who to tell. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on Aunt Margaret's guest bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about my mother's last summer. How she'd held my hand in that hospital bed and said, "Your education is the one thing nobody can take from you. And then my father, in a tuxedo, handing an envelope to a boy who wasn't her son. The next morning, Aunt Margaret poured me coffee and said one sentence that changed the direction of my life. "I don't think you should try to sue him. I think you should tell the story." I looked up. "What, you're a journalism major? You have 2 years of investigative reporting classes under your belt. You have documents. You have a witness in me. And you have a perspective that nobody else has. Which is his daughter. If you go after him with lawyers, he'll bury you in paperwork, and you'll be 45 before you see a dime. If you write it down carefully, thoroughly, and publish it where the right people can find it, you take his story away from him. You turn the lights on." I asked her where I'd even publish something like that. She smiled for the first time in 12 hours. "Substack," she said. "You set up a newsletter. You pick a name. You write chapter by chapter. And you don't name names in the first few pieces. You let people come to you." I sat with that for about an hour, drinking her coffee, watching her cat knock pens off the kitchen counter one by one. Then I opened my laptop and registered a new account. The newsletter was called The Missing Daughter. The first piece went up 3 days later. I wrote it in Aunt Margaret's guest room, surrounded by post-it notes and printouts. I didn't name my father. I didn't name Tyler or Diana. I called them the patriarch, the golden son, And the architect. Because Diana loved to tell people she architected environments, I told the story of a 13-year-old girl sitting next to her dying mother in a hospital. Receiving a promise, I told the story of that same girl. 10 years later. Watching the exact amount of her education savings handed across a country club ballroom, I told the story carefully. With dates. With dollar amounts rounded, to avoid being identifiable at first. With my emotions held back like a reporter describing a house fire. I ended the piece with a single line. Some fathers steal from their daughters with one hand and call it love with the other. This newsletter is for every daughter who finally stopped clapping. I hit publish at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I had 0 subscribers. By Friday, I had 4,000. The piece had been shared on a subreddit about estranged families. Then picked up by a parenting Substack, with a large mailing list. Then clipped on TikTok by a woman who read the last paragraph aloud to her camera while crying. I watched the subscriber number climb while I worked my cafe shift at a place in Aunt Margaret's town, where nobody knew my last name. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from strangers. Some were angry at me for airing family laundry. Most were not. Most said things like, "I'm the forgotten daughter in my family, and I thought I was crazy, and my brother got everything when our dad died, and I've never said a word until now, and please keep writing. I need to know how this ends." Meanwhile, back home, I was still getting texts from my father and Diana. "Dad, where are you? You disappeared from the dinner. You embarrassed Tyler. Dad, Emily. Call me. We need to talk about your behavior. Diana, your father is very hurt. You ruined Tyler's night. You need to apologize to the family. Tyler, yo, what's your problem? Seriously." Not one of them mentioned the check. Not one of them asked if I was okay. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept writing. The second piece was about the rehearsal dinner itself. I still didn't name anyone. But I described the ballroom, the quartet, the envelope, the amount. I described standing on the curb in my mother's earrings. I described driving to my aunt's house. I wrote about what it feels like to realize, at 23, that your father has been quietly rewriting your life story without telling you, casting you as a supporting character in somebody else's biography. That piece went wider than the first. By the end of the week, the missing daughter had 12,000 subscribers. And a producer from a true crime podcast had emailed me asking if I'd be interested in being interviewed anonymously. I said not yet. Aunt Margaret and I had a plan. And we weren't there yet. The third piece was when I started being specific. I wrote about Carter Industrial. I didn't name it yet, but I called it a regional hardware supply company in the Pacific Northwest, whose logo sits on a lot of Little League scoreboards. I described a pattern Aunt Margaret and I had found in those vendor reconciliations. How the same interior design firm had been paid 17 times in 3 years, for services that never appeared in any of the company's actual project files. I described how the amounts were always just under the threshold that would trigger an internal audit. I described how the interior design firm was owned by the patriarch's second wife. I wrote that piece carefully, the way Aunt Margaret taught me. With sources. With screenshots of public business filings. With a line at the bottom that said, "Documents on file with the author." When I published it, Aunt Margaret made me close my laptop, put my phone on airplane mode, and watch a movie with her. Because, she said, this is the one where the dam breaks. And you don't need to watch every crack in real time. The dam broke by Monday. An anonymous source inside Carter Industrial. I still don't know who. Though Aunt Margaret suspected Linda in accounts receivable. Forwarded my third piece to the company's largest client. a regional home improvement chain that had been doing business with my father for 16 years. Their compliance team opened an investigation into their own vendor records. 2 days later, they pulled their contract, pending review. That account was 38% of Carter Industrial's annual revenue. The second largest client pulled their contract the following Thursday. My father's phone started going to voicemail during business hours. Diana stopped posting on Instagram. And Tyler, who had married his fiancée Chloe, the weekend after the rehearsal dinner, in a ceremony I wasn't invited to, came home early from his honeymoon in Cabo because Chloe's parents were reassessing certain financial arrangements they had made for the couple. I learned this from Aunt Margaret, who was getting regular updates from Linda, who had apparently been waiting 11 years for someone to notice. Then my dad found me. He showed up at Aunt Margaret's front door on a Wednesday afternoon in the same navy blazer he'd worn to my high school graduation. He looked older than I remembered. And smaller. Which I didn't understand until later, when I realized it was because he wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't at the head of a conference table. He wasn't standing next to Diana. He was just a man on a porch. Aunt Margaret opened the door with one hand in the pocket of her robe. "Michael," she said. "No. Margaret. Please. I just want to talk to my daughter." "Your daughter will decide if she wants to talk to you. You wait on the porch." She closed the door. I was in the kitchen. I heard every word. I sat at the kitchen table for about 10 minutes, staring at my laptop, trying to figure out what I wanted. Then I stood up, walked through the living room, and opened the door myself. "I'll give you 15 minutes, I said. On the porch, Aunt Margaret stays in the doorway. "And I'm recording this." He flinched at that, but he nodded. "That's fair." I set my phone on the porch railing with the voice memo running. "Okay," I said. "Talk." He started with the apologies. The real ones. The kind you can tell somebody has practiced in the car on the way over. He said he knew what he had done. He said he had told himself for years that the money would be replaced, that he was only borrowing it, and that business had been tight, and he'd make it up to me when Tyler got settled. I asked him why Tyler got a wedding gift of exactly the amount I had in my account, down to the dollar. He was quiet for a long time. Then, he said, "Because Diana knew the balance. She'd known it for years. And she told me it would be a beautiful gesture." I felt my stomach turn over. "She told you to give my mother's money to her son, as a wedding present. And you thought that was a beautiful gesture." I thought his voice cracked. I don't know what I thought. I haven't known what I was thinking for a long time. I asked him about Carter Industrial, about the vendor invoices, about Diana's design firm. He didn't deny any of it. He said it had started small. After the 2019 tax year, when cash flow was tight, and Diana had suggested a way to move money through her firm that would keep the lights on. He said by the time he realized, he was in too deep. He was in too deep. He said he had been planning to clean it up for 3 years, and never had. "Dad," I said, "you didn't just steal from me. You stole from your employees. You stole from your clients. You stole from Mom." At that, he started crying. And I did not. I had cried enough at 14 to last me the rest of my life. I let him cry. Then I said, "I'm not going to stop writing. Not until the whole story is out. I'll keep the details fair. I won't lie about anything. But I'm not doing this for you, and I'm not stopping for you. This is for me. And for Mum. And for every kid who ever sat at a dinner table watching their inheritance get handed to somebody else. You understand?" He nodded. He was still crying. He asked if I would ever come home. I told him his home wasn't my home anymore. And it hadn't been for a long time. He asked if he could hug me. I said no. After he left, I sat on Aunt Margaret's porch for a long time. She brought out 2 glasses of lemonade and sat down next to me without saying anything. Finally, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "Not happy," I said. "But clear." She nodded. "That's usually how it goes." The 4th piece of the missing daughter was the one that named names. By that point, I had a lawyer, paid for by the advance on a book deal that Aunt Margaret helped me negotiate. And every sentence had been reviewed for defamation risk. I named Carter Industrial. I named my father. I named Diana's interior design firm, Vance Interiors. I named the specific fraudulent invoices by number and date. I did not name Tyler, because as far as we could tell, Tyler hadn't known. I did, however, describe the rehearsal dinner in detail, including the applause. That piece went viral in a way I wasn't prepared for. Local news picked it up. Then regional news. Then a business reporter at the Wall Street Journal asked for an interview. The state attorney general's office opened an inquiry into Carter Industrial within 2 weeks. Diana filed for divorce inside a month, because her lawyer apparently told her that distancing herself from my father was the only way to protect her own assets from seizure. She moved to Scottsdale. Tyler's marriage collapsed 6 weeks after the honeymoon, because Chloe's parents pulled the down payment they'd put on the young couple's house once the scandal hit. And Tyler, it turned out, I had no actual income of his own. He had been working in business development at Carter Industrial, which was a title my father had invented so Tyler could draw a salary without doing any real work. When the company lost its clients, that position was the first to be cut. Tyler, at 25, moved back into his mother's condo in Scottsdale and, according to a friend who still talked to him, worked the front desk at a CrossFit gym. I did not write about any of that in the newsletter. I had made a decision early on, with Aunt Margaret's guidance, that I would write about the systems and the choices, not about the downfall. I did not need to gloat. The facts were doing that for me. But I thought about it. God. Did I think about it? I thought about it every time I saw Tyler's name pop up in my phone in an angry voicemail I never listened to. I thought about it every time I passed a Little League scoreboard. I thought about it every time I walked through the grocery store in Aunt Margaret's town and a stranger recognized me from a podcast interview and squeezed my arm and said thank you. 6 months after the rehearsal dinner, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail. Listened later. He said the Attorney General's office had offered him a plea deal. He said he was going to take it, because the evidence was unambiguous, and fighting it would bankrupt him. He said he would probably serve between 18 months and 3 years in a minimum security facility. He said he wanted me to know first, before the paper printed it. He said he hoped one day I might be willing to visit him, but he understood if I wasn't. He said he loved me. He said he was sorry. He said my mother would be proud of me and ashamed of him. And he knew it. I listened to the voicemail 3 times. Then I saved it and closed the app. I didn't call him back that day. I didn't call him back that week. Eventually, about a year later, I would write him a single letter, 3 paragraphs long, saying that I forgave him in the sense that I no longer carried him around with me. But that forgiveness was not the same as a relationship, and I was not ready for a relationship with him, and might never be. He wrote back a shorter letter that just said, "I understand. I love you. I'm proud of the woman you've become." I keep that letter in the cedar box with my mother's things. That's the only place it belongs. By the time the Attorney General's office announced the plea agreement publicly, I had moved across the country. I'd gotten into a graduate journalism program at Columbia, with a full scholarship funded partly by an anonymous donor who Aunt Margaret swears she doesn't know anything about, though she smiles every time I ask. I live in a tiny apartment in Morningside Heights with a second-hand desk, facing a window that looks out at a brick wall. And I love it more than any room I've ever had. The Missing Daughter is still going. It has 140,000 subscribers. I write once a month now. Usually about something bigger than my own story. Because my own story reached the point where it had been told. And I don't believe in milking grief for content. I write about estate planning for blended families. About signs. Your sibling is being set up as a golden child. About how to document financial abuse in a way that holds up. I get letters every week from people who read those pieces and finally understood what was happening to them. The question I get asked most often, in interviews, in emails, at the occasional speaking event, is whether I regret publishing, whether I would have preferred to handle it privately, whether the family would still be intact if I had just gone to a lawyer instead of the internet. I think about that honestly, every time. Because I owe the question an honest answer. And the honest answer is this. My family was not intact before I published. My family had not been intact since my mother died. What I blew up was the performance of a family. The pretty picture my father and Diana had built on top of a hole in the ground. And performances are not the same as families. The family I have now is smaller and realer. It is Aunt Margaret, who picks me up from the airport every Christmas. It is Linda from Accounts Receivable, who took early retirement and sends me birthday cards with terrible jokes in them. It is a group of women I met through the newsletter who get on a video call once a month and talk about our mothers. It is, very recently, and very carefully, my father, in a visitation room. 1 hour a month, where he does not ask me for anything, and I do not pretend to forgive more than I do. I want to tell you something before I go. If you are the daughter in your family who keeps being asked to understand, to adjust, to accept less, to make yourself small so that somebody louder can feel comfortable, I want you to know that the version of you who finally stops is not the villain of the story. She is the only honest person in the room. And I want you to know that telling the truth out loud is not the same as betraying your family. Your family betrayed itself the moment it asked you to keep its secrets for it. If you are the golden child, the one who has always been handed the bigger slice of cake without asking why the other plate was empty, I want you to take a real, uncomfortable look at where your comfort came from. Find your sibling. Ask them the question. Be willing to hear the answer. And if you are a parent, especially a parent who is about to blend two families, or who has been telling yourself that your other kid is the easy one, I want you to pick up the phone today and ask your easy kid what they needed from you that you didn't notice. Then shut up and listen. A child who stops asking isn't fine. They've just stopped believing the question matters. My mother knew that. She wrote it in one of the letters she left me. In the cedar box, which I finally opened in Aunt Margaret's guest room. 3 nights after the rehearsal dinner. Because I wasn't ready before then. The letter said, If you're reading this, and something has gone wrong, I want you to know that you are allowed to be loud. I was quiet my whole life, and it cost me things. But loud. Baby. The people who love you will still be there when you're done. I was loud. And she was right. The people who love me are still here. So let me ask you. The way I always do. In your own family. In your own story. Who are you right now? The daughter who finally walked away from the table, the child who got the bigger plate and never asked why, or the parent who has one more chance to notice before it's too late? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.